Week 2, getting started with CSS. This week's objectives: exploring the history of CSS, studying different style sheet types, exploring style precedence and inheritance, how to apply colors in CSS, contextual selectors, attribute selectors, applying text and font styles, using web fonts, defining list styles, working with margins and padding space, using pseudo classes and pseudo elements, inserting page content with CSS. Here we see an example of a page that's been stylized with CSS. You can see the color here for this background set to HSL 277272. H1s are white text on black-orange backgrounds. H2 is a slightly lighter orange with white. Page text is slightly lighter than black. The body background is set to ivory. We'll see how this all works as we work through the slides here. CSS cascading style sheets. Latest version CSS3. Like HTML5, this is also a living document, and things get added every once in a while to the spec. Types of styles: you have browser styles and user agent styles, user-defined styles, and external styles. You also have embedded styles and inline styles. The three that you'll be using the most are your external style sheets, embedded style sheets, and inline style sheets. General syntax here: you see you have your selector. The selector is generally the name of an element or group of elements, the property, and its value, and that is always enclosed in the curly Q brackets. Browser extensions extend the library of style properties in the browser. Inventor prefixes indicate the browser that created and supports that style property. For example, if you have KHTML, that's a conqueror, which is a KDE-based browser, -MOZ for Mozilla-based browsers, -MS for Trident or Internet Explorer, -O Presto for Opera or Nintendo Wii. However, modern-day Opera now follows Chromium, so it would actually be WebKit now. Style sheets embedded: you have to have these in the head under the style tags. Inlines: they are actually directly into the element, and there is a hierarchy for how these work, which is the style, specificity, and precedence. The more specific it is, the more rule it has. Specificity takes over when there's conflict. For example, if it's in the inline, say you have your H1 tags set inline to be a specific color, but you have a style tag in the head that also defines the H1 to be a separate color. For example, if the inline was green, the style tag was blue, and you had an external style sheet as red, the one that one would be is green. If you had an external style sheet where you had separate H1 colors defined in there, the external sheet, whichever one came second, would then be the color. So you had an external style sheet that formatted color for an H1 tag as black and then white. The white would be the one that would get loaded into your HTML page. Inheritance is passed down to properties. So if you had an article and you told anything inside the article to be blue, if there was a p tag inside of there, the text inside of that p tag inside of the article section would then be blue. Outside of there, it would be whatever it is formatted to be. The developer tools inside browsers allow you to see the HTML code and CSS styles, and you can see how they get applied to specific elements. Different browsers have different ways of accessing them and how you can look at them. A style sheet comments, same as in JavaScript for multi-line comments, open slash star, comment, close slash star. Doing character encoding is also necessary. You need that at the start of all style sheets. And we want to have your comments in here so that we know that you looked at your information and everything looks good. If you import a style sheet, this is what you can do for a separate style sheet with multiple settings. So if you import a CSS file into your site URL, it is the same as linking to an HTML file, except that rather than adding multiple CSS files into your HTML file, you import them into your CSS files first. Color in CSS: 147 color names. Values can be RGB and HSL, as well as triplets. Additionally, now there is RGBA, which is how you can set your transparency. The triplets here are done in numbers 0 to 255. So red 255, green 0, blue 0 would be a straight red color. 0 255 0 is straight green, and then 0 0 255 is a straight blue. And then there are combinations in between of all of those. And you can also use a base 16 hex value as well. You can see here, this would be 255 0 0 because it doesn't have any. Magenta is 255 0 255. Red, green, and yellow would be red, or 255 255, and then blue 0. Blue and green becoming cyan, 0 red, 55 blue, 255 green. And then all three 255 for white. If all three were 0, that is the color for black. HSL is hue, saturation, and tint. The hue is set based on the direction of a color wheel. Saturation, intensity between 0 and 100%. And lightness is how bright it is, from 0 to 100%. So as an example, here's how that looks for your gradients. HSL of 38 shows we are at a 38 degree value, which is this orange, setting a 90% saturation and a 60% lightness. Opacity, using RGBA and HSLA, as I was talking about. These are done between numbers between 0 and 1. So 0.5 would be a 50% opacity or transparency. And you can also add that for both RGBA and HSLA. For color, you set your color straight with just color, colon, and then color either being a RGB value, HSL value, a color name, or a hex value. Same with background dash color, and it is the same values as color. Progressive enhancement is placing code conforming to elder standards before newer properties. So as an example, the opacity that we're looking at here. Some older browsers don't recognize RGBA or HSLA. So if you set RGBs first and then RGBAs, it will then ignore this for the older browser, and the newer browsers will be able to read this and process your opacity properly. Selector patterns here. H1, if you say make it red, every HTML H1 element will then be red. You can use selector patterns to specifically choose certain ones, however. You can also use contextual selectors, which is context under which a particular page element is matched. A parent element with more than one child element inside, within those child elements, including several levels of descendant elements. So a star matches all elements. Element is a specific element. Element 1, comma, element 2, etc. says any element matching that. If you do a parent descendant version, that would be, say, that article tag that we had earlier. If we had article and then space P, paragraphs inside would be applied to that. Parent greater than child is only child elements inside of that parent element. Element 1 plus element 2 means that stylize element 2 only if there's an element 1 tag immediately before it, and element 1 tilde element 2 means you can stylize element 2 as long as element 1 occurred at any point before it. This wildcard, as I said, is a selector. Sibling selectors chooses elements based on things that are adjacent to them. Selectors you can also set with ID and class. ID elements, they are specific to the tags themselves. Once you use an ID, you can only use it once. Classes can apply to multiple elements to say all of them are a certain type. So if you had H1 tags and you wanted all of them to be a class of red, you could do so. And then later on, you could do a specific body tag that also was red based on that class. To do that, elements use the hashtag ID. You see how that works. As an example, H1 hashtag intro. That means that anything with the ID of intro will then be stylized like that. Element.class means that anything here with a paragraph in the main class and using just .main is generic, and that means that if you had any tag with the main class inside of it, it would then apply to that. For hypertext, you have to use the element and attribute option with the A bracket href. And then you have to use this here for attribute equals text. So specifically anything where the link is top. You can also use a little bit more of a generic. You can look for tags that contain the word glossary. You can search for ID tags that specifically have the word first in them. You can search for tags where the relative begins with prev. You can search for element tags where the href statement with the $sign has .org in it if there are multiple. You can use this here for anything that contains a specific word, regardless of where it is inside of the element attribute. Typography or fonts, designing appearance and characters of letters on a page. Color and font are the few properties that CSS does with typographical styles. You could choose fonts based on style, appearance, and even for each character of the alphabet. Like it says here, you can use font-family equals fonts. You can set multiple fonts using a comma separated list, which becomes a font stack. You can set a specific font and then a generic font. So for example, font groups are serif, sans serif, monospace, cursive, and fantasy. Web-safe font stacks. Here you see specifically we want to use Arial, followed by Helvetica or sans serif. So it will first look for Arial. If Arial exists, it will use that. If it doesn't exist, it will then look for Helvetica. If it can't find that, then it will use a generic sans serif font. For Lucida Console, you can see here that it does the same. Notice here that Lucida Console is a multiple word font, so you have to include that inside of a single quote. And you need to do that for any font that is multi-worded. And here is an example of multiple ones and how those work. Web fonts, they are fonts for the browser from an external file because web-safe fonts limit the number of font choices. There are universally accepted fonts called Web Open Font Format. There are multiple types. Most likely these days you're going to see TrueType fonts, OpenType fonts, and Web OpenType fonts, as well as SVGs. However, those are limited specifically to Safari. You can see them as images inside of your pages, but not generally for text purposes. For adding a font, you use @font-face, and then you can define that and use it in the font stack. So for example here, if you want to use font-face, font-family name, the source, find the URL, format is some form of text, either OTF, WOF, TTF, the secondary format for it with descriptors. The name of the font, the URL is where to find it, text is a description, it is optional with the value 1 pairs, and they are optional against style properties. You would also set your font size using font-size:/, and you can set that with either absolute or relative units. Absolute units are only used for printed media. These are things that we'll cover later on. Relative units are relative to the size of other objects in the page or display properties of the device itself. It is scalable for font sizes in that way. You have percentage, EM units, rem or root EM units. You can also use pixels. Viewports. These are a new unit for CSS equal to specific units of either 1% of the browser window width and height, and a vmin is either VW or VH based on whichever is smaller. A Vmax is either VW or VH based on whichever one is larger. Font sizes, you can set those with names, or you can also set them with actual size numbers. Kerning is space between fonts. You can set those specifically with the letter dash spacing element attribute and the word dash spacing element attribute. You can set line height using line dash height, set indentation by text dash indent, and you can also create a hanging indent for a negative indentation. So what that means is if you did text indent -5, that would indent the first line by 5 characters. If you set it to -5, the indent on the first line would be 0, and then every other line below that first line would then be indented 5 characters. So for example here, we've set our H1 font families here to Quicksand, Verdana, Geneva, or sans serif. We've set our letter spacing to 0.1 EM. For hypertext, we want to say double space, so we use 2 EM. An EM is equivalent of a single line. For font sizes, we've set those to 0.8. You can set font style, which is normal, italic, or oblique. Font weight is how bold or not you want it to set. Text decoration, this is your underline, overline, strike through, or line through. Text transform, you can capitalize to uppercase, lowercase, none, or capitalize, meaning every single word is capitalized at its first letter. Font variant, you can specifically say use a certain type, either normal or small caps. For horizontal alignments, that would be on the page left, right, and center, and justify. Vertical alignment is how it's aligned to the top and the bottom, either to the page or whichever element it is inside. Vertical element is baseline, bottom, middle, sub, super, text dash bottom, text dash top, or top. And here is how those work inside of those vertical align elements. Subs and superscripts, you can set those to be on a certain font. You can also do everything on a single line. I would suggest at first you start doing everything separately so that you have a strong, good idea of what each thing is doing, because you have to do them in a certain order. So in order, you can do font style, variant, weight, size/height, and family. So as we said here, you can do font and do everything in one quick line. And as you see here, we are setting our footer, and that will then format the line for Try and Succeed Sports footer in the format that we suggested. A list marker, the style used for each list for both ordered and unordered lists. You could change it for anything. The type are various types of markers. You have multiple options: discs, circles, squares, decimal leading 0, decimal, lower and upper Romans, lower upper alpha, lower upper Greek, or none. You can also later on add in a image file to use as the bullet point, and you can nest them as well. So for example here, if you want to create a style list that the outer lines are uppercase Romans, that would be the Roman numeral 1, I, Roman numeral 2, capital II, etc. But then you had a secondary list embedded below that. You wanted to make sure that those were uppercase alphas. Those would be uppercase A, uppercase B, etc. And if you had a third list, tertiary, below those upper alpha lists, you would make sure that those came out numbered, 1, 2, 3. And as I was saying, you can set a list style as an actual image file instead of an actual bullet. And if you do that, you can see here we've got list-style-image, URL, and then the image file name of runIcon.png. So you see here, rather than a standard bullet, we've changed it so that it is this icon. CSS treats each list with a block level element, with each virtual box list marker placed outside of the list text. You can change the default behavior using the list-style position and set that position to be either inside or outside. So for example, here we have list-style position. That's basically asking where are the bullet points, where are the bullets or the numbers going. You see here they are set to the outside, meaning that they are separate from the list. Here we have them set to inside, meaning that the bullet point starts on the first line of that bullet, and as far as it's concerned is fully embedded. You can use the box model for block level elements, which can set padding space, borders, margins, and which is how the space is between each element. For example, here we have margin on the outside, border here, followed by padding, followed by the actual text inside. You set your padding with size using the length units, or you can set it to auto to have it automatically select. So here we're setting our pat with px or pixels. You have to make sure that you use px when you are setting any values with pixel numbers. If you don't do that, it will not work correctly. So what this is saying is our line height is 2em, so we have double spaced. List style type, we have that set to none. And padding on our left is set to 5 pixels, meaning that when the padding starts, there's 5 pixels between where it stops and where it starts for unordered lists. So this is the space between there and the bullet in the first line of text. You can also set margins with the size using the same values as before. You can set the margin all at once. You can set the margin using 2 values. So if you do margin size with a single value, that sets your margin for all 4 sides as that size. So if you set margin 5px, that would set the entire margin, up, bottom, right, and left, to be 5 pixels. If you do it this way, you can set each one specifically. So if you wanted 5, 10, 15, 20, then your top one would be those respective pixel values. If you have 2 values, then it's top and bottom for the first value, and left and right for the second value. You can also set your border width for your size doing the same way, with 1, 2, or 4 values. So here we're setting specifically also margin dash top of 20px. So if we do that, that means we're just setting our margin top, and the rest of them will remain 0. So here we see li.newGroup. Remember that, that means we're looking for anything with the class name of new group. So if we had an li out that was not classified new group, this top margin would not apply to it. Pseudoclasses are elements classified based on its status, position, or use inside of the document. To do so, you set your element with a pseudoclass, and that you set with the name of those pseudoclasses. Then you also have structural pseudoclasses, which is basing the element on its location within the structure of the HTML document. And these are certain pseudoclasses. There are others, but these are the major ones. So if you have root, which means is the very first element or the HTML element. Anything that's 0 content. An only child means it has no siblings. First and last child, meaning if you had your item list inside of your LI elements with multiple LI elements, and you had a first child set for that, that would mean they would apply to the first bullet or number. Last child would apply only to the specific number. First of type and last of type, same, only it is for the specific type. Nth of type, meaning specifically a certain type. Only of type. Lang, anything that is not something. So for example, here we want first of type. We're changing it from all of them from just that run icon so that they are specifically certain things. So here we've got the URL li first of type is going to remain our run icon. Nth dash of type, meaning the second one, we're going to change that to that bike icon. And last of type, because we know it's our last one, is swim icon. You could also use nth of type 3 here or nth of type 1 here. Dynamic pseudo classes will change state based on user actions. For example, we see links here, a link set without any visiting, a link that's been visited, meaning you've clicked on it, or some other aspect action. Active means that you are actually clicking on it. Hover means you are over top of it. And focus means that it is the focus of your keyboard or mouse. Pseudo elements exist only within that rendered page, and they need to be selected using a double colon. Element, colon, pseudo dash element. So the element is the one from the HTML file, and pseudo dash element is the name for the pseudo element you're using. For example, here we have pseudo element first letter, first line, before, and after. So what would this one be good for? Say you are formatting a page so that it looks like a book. For first letter, you could set it to be a really pretty ornate font, as if it was, say, the first chapter of a book. And it would only apply to the first letter of that p tag. Before and after, meaning use only before certain text or something happens. For example, here we have none, counter, attr attribute, text, open and close quotes, removing quotes if needed, as well as the URL where we saw with the image, media, video, etc. You saw that we had that for our pseudo element for the bullet points. For attribute values, use the content, attr, open parentheses, attribute, close parenthesis, semicolon. The attribute is that of whatever your selected element is. Block quote, cue elements for quoted materials, and you decorate those using content of open or close quote. See here we're setting character codes. The quote here is 201C and D. These are the specific characters for those character codes. We say before this pseudo element of a block quote, we want to use the open quote, set our font family to Times New Roman, Times, and Serif with a 1.6 font size and a font weight of bold. And then after, we're setting our block quote to close it, setting our font size again for that close quote to Times New Roman, Times, and Serif with a 1 and a font weight of bold. CSS errors are very unforgiving. Please make sure you are submitting and validating, and that will help you resolve a lot of the issues that happen with the autograder. The validator at validator.w3c.org, or you can add the extension inside of GitHub Codespaces. If you're using a validator, see how the CSS works if you know that you have errors. That is all for this week's presentation. Thanks, and have a great week.